Hello to all our viewers around the world. Welcome to JSR, Africa's global platform. As you may be aware by now, an unprecedented humanitarian emergency is happening right now across Europe and the Mediterranean. Europe today is facing its largest refugee crisis since World War II. Chaos at border crossings and train stations, squalid conditions in makeshift refugee camps, and a heartbreaking photograph of a drowned Syrian toddler have all helped to bring Europe's refugee crisis into the global spotlight. This may not be new to the world, but the numbers here are unprecedented. About 4 million refugees. This year alone, 2,900 people have drowned in the Mediterranean, a number of them from sub-Saharan Africa. My mission today is to find the African connection. How does Africa contribute to the migrant crisis in Europe? Has Africa got anything to offer Europe at all in finding a solution to the current crisis? Join the conversation on our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/Joy News on TV or facebook.com/Jefferson Sackey Reports. You can also tweet with the hashtag JSR. Let's get started. Let's bring in my guest for this edition. Palta Malady is a Ugandan-born economist. He's also the CEO of Africa Builds Initiative. He's also a regular contributor to JSR. Leo Johnson is himself a former refugee, now the CEO of Empowerment Squad, a Canadian charity that works with individuals and communities to effect sustainable change. He joins us all the way from Hamilton. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me today on JSR. And let me start with you, Leo Johnson. Obviously, because of your situation, this may not be new to you. You were yourself a refugee. Fleeing the conflict in Liberia, walking to Ivory Coast and later to Ghana. What does this European migrant and refugee crisis remind you of?
It breaks my heart, first of all, because the migrant or the refugee crisis is something that has been going on since the late 80s, early 90s. West Africans, largely, and East African from Congo, Liberia, Guinea, Sierra Leone, have been making that trip across the Mediterranean. And we've tried to raise the issues. We've tried to let people know that this was a serious problem brewing, and it's been going on for more than a decade, and no one paid attention to it. In fact, there have been camps, incarceration camps, in many parts of Europe with refugees who have come across using the Mediterranean Channel. So it breaks my heart that it's taking almost 15 to 20 years, and all of a sudden we're pretending like this started yesterday. This has been going on for a very, very long time.
And shouldn't we be looking at this with a different lens? These are record-breaking numbers, right? Since World War II. This may actually be new to Europe's new generation. But what would actually push someone to embark on a journey that he or she is not guaranteed of safety?
It is very unfortunate that many people think that these decisions are taken by people lightly who move across these dangerous journeys to make it to a safe place. There's only one thing: absolute fear of your life and absolute hopelessness. Because this is it, you have no choice. You're already guaranteed that you're going to die if you stay where you are. So you're better off taking the chances and making the journey and hoping that you survive it, even though you know most of the time most people will not survive. Everything from diseases to dangerous places in forests, across rivers, across violent waters, sleeping in the bushes, rain or shine, you are under it with young children. But people have no choice because they know they will die where they are. So they might as well take the chance and see if they might be lucky enough to survive. And it's unfortunate that people look at it from afar and think, why would people do that? Because they have nothing left, absolutely nothing.
Palta Malady, let's trace the African connection to this. There are crises in the Democratic Republic of Congo, South Sudan, the Central African Republic, all in Africa, right? And also in Ukraine, Iraq. these are countries that have partly driven the crisis. But more than half of these refugees worldwide in 2014, since 2014, actually came from 3 countries. You're talking about Syria, you're talking about Afghanistan, you're talking about Sudan, still an African connection. What could the actual factors be?
It's 2 things. It's politics and economics. Politically, we're talking about war. In the case of Syria, we can talk about war. And so that is the quickest instigator of migration. People just flee a war quickly, right now. My life is in danger. I've had a personal experience of that. The economic migration takes a bit longer, but it's still a similar motivator. If people are living in a place where they don't see any hope for the future, life is really difficult, the economy is not functioning for everybody, they'll eventually do whatever they can. They'll sell their land, their home, all put their savings together and make a treacherous trip somewhere else. So it's both economics and politics. We've seen it coming. I think the world should be honest and say we're responsible for not doing enough to prevent these kinds of occurrences. When developed countries think that the easiest response to an entity like ISIS is war, that is very childish. That's very silly. Because if you simply respond militarily, this is the result you're going to get. You cannot assume that you're going to beat down an entity like ISIL or ISIS in a day, in a week, in a year. Even if you beat them down completely, there's a country that has to be rebuilt. There's an economy that has to function for everybody. And so it is naive to think that we can just have military responses to these sorts of issues. We have to recognize that the globe has to take responsibility for every other part of the globe. We have to make sure that every part of the world is developed. It doesn't have to be at the same level, but it has to be a place that people are happy to stay in, are comfortable staying in, are at peace. So this is a global issue. It should be a global response.
And if it needs a global response, how would you describe Africa's response so far to this?
Quite frankly, I think it's been silent. I don't think there's enough understanding, certainly amongst African leaders, of what precipitates this kind of crisis. At its basis, it's a governance issue. Most of the people that we're talking about here are fleeing poor economic conditions. The Syrians are highlighting a political problem. There is war in Syria, and so the majority of Syrians that are fleeing to Europe are fleeing because of a war. But frankly, most Africans are fleeing Africa, not because of political issues, it's economic.
So economic and political reasons, right? But it doesn't really justify the reason why they would have to, take the risk in taking these dangerous journeys. Leo, what's your take on that? Why has Africa been so silent on this European crisis? You also see this as a global problem?
It is a global problem. And in fact, it's been an African problem for a very long time, because we know for how long civil wars have been going on the African continent. And we've had thousands, hundreds of thousands of people making dangerous journeys across different countries and the different borders. It's unfortunate that up to this time, I'm yet to hear any major African organization or leader stepping up to the fore to see what we can do from our end to deal with some of this problem. In fact, we still have this problem. Libya has been a channel for most African refugees making the trip across the Mediterranean Sea into Europe, specifically into Great Britain. There's a lot of African refugees that have come through that channel. And I will hope that African leaders start to take some responsibility and don't see this as someone else's problems. When we can make our places safer, when we can cater to our citizens, and when we can take the responsibility as our leaders to provide some good political leadership, I think we will be able to save hundreds of thousands of lives. And we need to work with our European partners to make sure it's not just a one-sided thing. We're working both with the Europeans and our leaders to ensure that even if people will have to make the trip as refugees, we can provide safe passage for them. We can make sure they go through the proper channel and be treated like human beings.
But really, why is Africa adding up to this European migrant crisis? You have a continent, Europe, that is already going through, its own internal political and economic crisis. Yet you have African migrants who would also want to embark on these dangerous journeys to be in Europe, only to add up to an already worse situation. Can Africa actually come out of this, Paul Tamale?
It is possible. It's going to take time. You need to understand there's a historical context to this. If African governance had been as good as it should be since independence, would have had African countries that are prosperous, that are stable, and most citizens would have been eager to stay in their countries because they'd have a life there. What you have right now is a lot of poverty in African countries. You have a demographic challenge. Africa's population is growing very, very fast. And most African countries have not been ready for this population explosion. And so you look at cities that are unlivable in many cases. Easily 90% of Africans live in squalid conditions. It's very unfortunate, but it's a fact. It's these people that are looking for somewhere to go. And if Europe and the rest of the world do not start to think very seriously about engaging Africa and helping African countries grow economically, then what you see now is it's just a trickle. It's just a trickle. These numbers may look overwhelming, but they're just a trickle. It will get much worse. Let me point to numbers very quickly. Africa's population right now is about 1 billion people. It is projected to grow to 2 billion, double in 35 years, by 2050, 2 billion people. By the end of the century, it's projected to exceed 4 billion people. If we're already seeing Africans willing to make treacherous trips to get to Europe when the population is 1 billion, what happens when it increases to 2 billion? There has to be an all-hands-on-deck attitude right now to develop African countries. You need those countries vibrant, strong, so that Africans can want to stay in Africa as opposed to seek a better life somewhere else.
And talking about population, Paul, let's take a look at this population projection, especially the dark green line at the bottom and the red line. The green line at the bottom is the population of Europe, which is basically flat. The red line is the population of Africa. Now, back in 1950, Africa's population was almost half of that of Europe. Where you see the dotted line is that of the present, right? The population of Africa is way more than that of Europe. The projection is that by the year 2100, Africa's population will just be uncontrollable, just as you have said. Does Africa really need the Western support to be economically viable to prevent her people from making these dangerous trips, Leo?
I will respectfully disagree with that opinion, and I will tell you why. I mean, I've had a chance to live here in the West for a while and also live in Africa, in quite a few countries, actually. And this is why I would tell you, in fact, if anything, the West needs to start looking at what they've done to disempower Africa in many ways. And I mean, instead of coming to Africa as partners and working with us, I mean, the model has always been they come in as people who take control of their interest. This whole idea of political interest, relations of nations and countries based on political interest is what has damaged Africa. You know, we have a long-standing history. And people say, oh, don't go back to the time of colonialism. And what. I'm not blaming that, but I'm telling you, there are remnants of that are still very active in our society. And this is all I tell people. Everybody feels that if Africa is empowered or left to control some of their own issues, the world will fall apart. It will not fall apart. The United States, North America, Europe went through difficult stages of actually messing up and screwing up until they got it right. So maybe Africa needs to be given a chance as well of trying to figure out where we go. And will there be mistakes? Yeah, there will be many mistakes. Will there be detectors? There will be detectors. But I think our partners, if they work with us, can empower us to try and solve this problem. We are not short of solutions on the African continent. We have many solutions there, but most often these solutions get trashed and overlooked simply because, I mean, other players feel they have superior ideas than people on the continent. Maybe we should start giving people on the continent a shot, especially the younger population. 70% of our population on the continent is under the age of 35 years old. It's about time that we start to ask them about what they think some of the solutions are and not just keep playing game with the same players we've done for the last 50 years on the continent.
That's quite interesting, Leo Johnson. You're watching JSR, Africa's global platform. When we return, how are European leaders handling the situation? Do we see an end to this migrant crisis anytime soon? As Germany reaches the threshold of 800,000 refugees, what happens to those stranded behind borders? And what should Africa do specifically? We're back after this break.
We are World Vision, and we believe in children. We believe in God's calling to help them flourish and achieve a full life. We believe every child deserves clean water, nutritious food, and basic health care. We believe in educating girls and women about immunizations and the healthy timing and spacing of pregnancies, saving the lives of newborns and new moms, helping more children live a full life beyond age 5.
If you believe, visit worldvision.org/believe.
Disheartening images from Europe as the migrant crisis worsens. Thousands continue to cross borders while security forces clash with migrants. Well, since Syria's civil war began in 2011, more than 4 million Syrians have sought shelter in neighboring countries. Just this week, over 20 people, including 4 children, drowned on Tuesday between Turkey and Greece when their boat capsized. The African connection is also staring the world in the face. Ripple effects of political and economic crisis in Somalia, Libya, and the Arab Spring have all contributed to this. Hello and welcome back to JSR, Africa's global platform. Palta Malady, did the world see this coming or not?
Again, the things that are called tipping points, seminal events, that's what this is. There's some of us that have been saying for years now that there will be a migrant crisis. It's inevitable. You could see it coming. The Arab Spring, that's something that was also predicted. You can see the demographics and know that there's going to be a problem. It's going to come. But the world chooses to ignore it until they start to see images like these on television. Then they wake up. It's been a long time coming. We've taken too long to respond, but now is the time for rational minds to step forward and speak and talk about what should be done. Angela Merkel of Germany has done the right thing. She stepped up and she's been bold. European countries have been talking about taking in a total of about 45,000 refugees. I believe these were Syrian refugees. She just said, let's throw that out of the window. Germany will take in 800,000. She's embarrassed other European leaders because she's made them realize that we've been playing token on this issue. It's time for people like Angela Merkel to step up and speak the truth to what needs to be done to resolve these kinds of crises.
Let's focus on the images coming out of Europe, Leo Johnson. It was this particular image of this little boy washed ashore that actually drew the world's attention to the seriousness of the migrant crisis in Europe. And I'm sure it brings back memories of things that you've seen before, Leo.
It definitely does. And it's very difficult for me personally, as I was just on a refugee camp 3 weeks ago, on the Buduburam refugee camp in Ghana. And what shocks me is this. Does it have to take a young child body being washed on a beach for us to wake up and say this is a problem, for us to wake up and say people are dying? We know people are dying. That's just one child. Hundreds of children are dying by the hour as we speak. Why would it have to take one child body washing up on the beach in such a vicious manner for us to finally say, oh, there is something? It's been going on since the early 90s. Hundreds of thousands of children have died and continue to die even as I speak. Let's stop playing this game of sympathy. It's not about sympathy. I tell people, you can sit and watch this and see the crisis brew and see if we all would not be affected at some point. We all in all of these countries, Europe and North America, came here one way or the other, or our great-grandparents, either as refugees or as migrants. And there were channels that were made safer for them to have access. Let's open those channels again. Let's find solutions at the source of the problems in these countries. Let's ask ourselves, what are we not doing to help stop these wars? Or what are we doing to help these wars continue to be fought in these places? And when we start to have that real conversation, I think we will start to see some clear solutions that are currently being blurred by the politics of the day.
Let's talk about leadership. Let's take a look at how European leaders are actually handling this situation in the first place. You have the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who perhaps took the very bold decision when she first announced Germany's commitment in embracing about 800,000 refugees, right? Just last week, we heard the British Prime Minister David Cameron also coming out clearly to announce the United Kingdom's commitment to accept Syrian refugees in the UK. Is that a fair handling of the situation by European leaders, Paul?
Listen, let's talk about proportionality. If Germany is going to take 800,000 Syrian refugees, Great Britain should be taking 500,000.
And why is that?
France should be taking 400,000. That's the kind of number you should be talking about. What Angela Merkel has done is to expose European leaders' hypocrisy. The numbers they've been banning about in the past were token numbers, small numbers. 20,000 to the UK. By the way, that 20,000 number is in response to Angela Merkel raising the stakes. So no, we've seen Cameron's record on this. It is not a good record. If you look at conservative politicians in the UK, their response has been appalling. There's outright racism at play here, outright xenophobia at play here. So Great Britain, the United Kingdom, should be letting in many more people. Politicians, it's incumbent on politicians to think about how do we organize our country? How do we rearrange our economy to take in more people? Give up the illusion of setting up a boundary and saying, we'll only let in people that we like or the ones that look a certain way. Get rid of that idea. It doesn't work anymore.
Leo Johnson, are you surprised by the manner in which some European countries are actually handling this situation? You have a whole nation which actually believes in today's world that the best way to handle this crisis is to build fences, brutalize refugees, build concrete walls, and also prevent people from sort of crossing borders, which actually reminds me of the fall of the Berlin Wall back in 1989. I thought the world had actually moved on from that stage. What are the implications to these brutalities on these refugees?
I think the implications would be massive. We will see, first of all, the very principles that we always boast about, that people died for, people fought for: freedom, rights, democracy. We will start to see all of that being eroded, and it just starts to show people that we are more hypocritical than we actually think. And the more people start to believe that, no one's going to take any of this seriously. Look, we need to understand, we don't live in an isolated world. We can start to build fences around our borders and encircle ourselves and pretend like we live in isolation to the rest of the world. And we can have people, because the only people who can infiltrate those walls will be the criminals. And we will be the human traffickers who can continue trafficking hundreds of thousands of people into these very countries that we think we're protecting people from and treating them as slaves. Or we can have genuine conversations with ourselves about how we've neglected our democratic tenets, our principles of human rights and freedoms, by funding and fueling and watching wars around the world happening and sit either by and watch it because we think it doesn't affect us. The more we start to do to find genuine solutions at the source of these problems, be it what are we doing to stop these wars, or what are we doing by participating in them, and how can we work with others and put pressure on some of the players to stop these wars, the better our world will become. The longer we keep this problem going, trust me, eventually we will all start to feel the heat. And like the people say, trust me, the chicken will come home to roost. And I hope that people don't sit down and wait for that time. We can do something to help solve the problems.
Okay, in doing something to solve the problem, let's talk about Africa first. What can Africa do to help Europe at this moment?
The best help that Africa can give to Europe is for Africa to help itself. African politicians should recognize that they are leading the fastest growing part of the globe in the 21st century. Africa's population growth is unprecedented in history. These numbers are stunning. You have to consider that in 1950, the entire world's population was 2.5 billion people. In 1950. Africa's population is going to be 2 billion people in 2050. Africa alone. 4 billion people in 2100. So Africa alone is going to be almost twice what the entire world's population was in 1950, after 150 years. These are UN numbers. These numbers, these projections are real. So African leaders should recognize that the time has come to stop playing games with extensions of term limits and all this nonsense. Focus on really building your country. Let's focus on economics. Let's focus on building infrastructure. Let's focus on educating our people. Let's get rid of the petty tribal differences. These are very dangerous things. When African leaders decide that they'll favor one tribe over another because they're still thinking 100 years ago, what they're risking is a situation where millions of people will decide to just pick up and go. That precipitates these refugee crises. Can this be solved in a year? No, it cannot be. But if we start now and say, over the next 15 years, over the next 20 years, we're going to make a concerted effort to turn Africa into a thriving, prosperous continent, it can be done. It takes leadership, but it can be done.
Absolutely. I think our African leaders need to come to the table and engage with their Western partners to find joint solutions as to what we can do from our end on the African continent to make sure we are curbing the flow of migrants, not by putting army and sea boats and gunboats and helicopters overseas, but by making sure we are improving the lives of our local people, we are improving the economies, we are stopping the bloodshed, we are stopping the civil wars, and we are making sure that we are putting the necessary pressure on the people who think they can continue to pillage the continent for their selfish aim and greed. I think we can come to the table and we have a lot to offer to work with our Western partners to stop this mess that continues to see young children dying every day and every hour.
Interesting. May I say thank you to you, Leo Johnson, yourself a former refugee, now the CEO of Empowerment Squad, a Canadian charity that works with individuals and communities to effect sustainable change. I really do appreciate your time. And I'm grateful to you, Paul Tamale Musumbwa, a Ugandan-born economist and the CEO of Africa Built Initiative. You're also a regular contributor to JSR. I really do appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jefferson.
My recommendation this week is a book that is a must-read for a unique insight into how law has been applied to migrant refugees and other unpopular minorities. It is The Borderline Justice, The Rights for Refugees and Migrants' Rights, a book by Frances Weber, a legal practitioner with over 30 years' experience. She writes, quote, "Our leaders encourage and treat as heroes those people who are fighting for democracy and human rights in Burma, in Libya, in Egypt and Syria. But as soon as these heroes seek sanctuary here in the free world, they are transformed into a hostile alien threat to our values, to be kept out by military patrols and all paraphernalia of modern immigration controls." Unquote. It is an interesting read. And thank you to all our viewers around the world for joining us today on JSR. Be reminded that the conversation continues on our Facebook page. You can also tweet with the hashtag JSR or log on to YouTube for all previous editions of GSR. Have a great weekend.